In order to disgust my mortal enemy, I followed the example of his fangirls and called him hubby. On the court, I deliberately shouted, "My husband is so handsome. My husband is so great." As a result, he pushed me against the wall and asked me while kissing me, "Tell me more about how great your husband is? No, where is the homophobia?" 1. In the morning, the driver had just parked the car when Frank's figure flashed past the window. The boy in school uniform, with a thin and aloof figure, was bending down slightly to park and lock his bicycle. I hurriedly chased after him and slapped Frank on the butt. The latter suddenly straightened up and looked at me murderously. I ran a few steps away, grinning. "Hey Franks, but feels really good. Why are you glaring at me like that? How about I touch you back?" As I said this, I deliberately stuck out my butt. Frank looked at me for 2 seconds, then ignored me with a sullen face, locked the car, walked around me and entered the school gate. Good, if he is unhappy, then I am happy. A good day starts with disgusting Frank. 2. I didn't want to do this to Frank at first, but he is such an ungrateful guy. Frank transferred here at the end of his sophomore year. His transfer at this time, coupled with his outstanding appearance, caused a huge sensation among the girls in our grade. I didn't pay attention to him at first, it was just that there was one more person in the class. Until one day, the driver was taking me to school, and the car broke down halfway because of rain. After trying to hail a taxi for a long time but no one took the order, Frank rode his shabby little bicycle and stopped in front of me. "Classmate, you're going to be late. I'll take you." This was my first time riding a bicycle when I was 17 years old. The hardback seat hurt my butt. When I got to school, I put 100 yuan on Frank's desk as a thank you. He frowned and gave it back to me. "Classmate, you lost your money." I thought to myself, this person is quite reserved. Could it be that he thinks it's not enough? I rarely had the patience to tell him thank him for riding his bike with me this morning. Only then did a look of realization show on his face. After all this time, he still didn't recognize me. I am a well-known figure in this school, but he doesn't even know me. Forget it. Even though he doesn't know how to appreciate my kindness, I'm not a petty person. He doesn't want money, so I buy him food and daily necessities. Anyway, in our he family, there is no reason to accept favors from others with a clear conscience. But this kid just refused to accept it. Haha, you are so pretentious. After observing for a week or two, I found that this person had turned himself into an isolated island. He has no friends at school. He either attends classes or reads books and does homework. He doesn't interact with anyone and is very withdrawn. I thought, since they don't accept my stuff, I might as well make friends. So I took the initiative to ask him to play ball with me and have dinner together after school. He rejected me again. No one has ever rejected me like this. You are so ungrateful. My younger brother was very perceptive and wisely spoke up for me. "Patrick, let us help you teach him a lesson." I was playing games and was angry at the time, so I didn't hear anything and just nodded casually. A few days later, I heard that Frank was beaten. At that time, I was lying on the table to catch up on my sleep, and a stack of test papers fell on my table. I was confused, and Frank's expression was cold. "Even if you let someone beat me to death, I will not help you with your homework." I was confused. When did I hit you? And when did I ask you to help me with my homework? He suppressed his anger and sneered. "You dare to do it, but you don't dare to take the responsibility." I got angry too. "Show me the evidence if you're talking like that." Frank's eyes swept over me and the guys around me with sarcasm. I don't know what he was thinking about, but in the end he just clenched his fists and walked away angrily. When I later learned about this misunderstanding, I gave my younger brothers a good lesson. Although I am arrogant, I don't bully. Later I apologized to Frank, but he ignored me, so I gave up the idea of being friends with him. But I didn't expect that he would report me one day in the future. 3. During a break in my senior year of high school, I was smoking with my little brothers behind the school's abandoned warehouse. Although none of us were good at studying, the hardworking and intense atmosphere around us deeply influenced me. So it has become my international routine to come to this corner to smoke and relax during the long breaks. I just lit a cigarette and put it in my mouth. At the entrance in the corner, Frank and the Dean of Studies appeared there. Frank pointed at me and said, Teacher Jack, the cigarette butts found in the men's restroom last time were also found by them. Oh my God. I glared at Frank, who had a calm expression and was looking straight ahead. He totally ignores me. Good job, Frank. This time, the feud has been settled. But it was naive of him to think that reporting me would get me punished. I've said it before, I'm a well-known figure in this school. Why else could it be? Because the school's newly opened computer room and reading room were all funded by my father. Although I was scolded when I got home, I was unharmed at school. I showed off in front of Frank. What? You didn't expect that your report would have no effect on me. Frank didn't even look up. He continued to work on the questions and said, Patrick, I never thought of punishing you. So you're so bored that you report me? He flipped over the draft paper and said, Smoking is against the student code. We are classmates, and I am just concerned about our classmates' physical and mental health. I really care about my classmates' health. I kicked his desk and walked away cursing. Frank's calm voice suddenly came from behind. Those people around you couldn't escape, right? When we were caught by the dean, everyone except me had their backpacks searched. Although I was fine this time, my younger brothers were not. One of them found someone else's lost things in his school bag. In addition to writing a self-criticism, some of them were even suspended or expelled from school. Suddenly, I remembered that those were the ones who had beaten Frank. I suddenly felt cold all over. For, although Frank lives like an isolated island, he is outstanding. He won first place in the province in a competition in his senior year of high school and became famous throughout the school overnight. Therefore, even though he is so aloof, there are still girls without good taste who put food and drinks in his desk pocket every day. Every time this happened, I would flash in front of him, snatch it away, and put it in my mouth. Then he said in a mean way, I have not had a good appetite recently, but seeing you has made my appetite increase. Hey, you said you care about your classmates' health? Why do you look like that? Frank stared at me for a long time, then turned around, went downstairs, went to a small supermarket and bought an identical one and returned it to the girl. But I didn't expect that not only girls were bewitched by him, but also boys. I happened to see it that day when a boy from the next class stopped Frank and confessed his love to him. Frank said that he didn't like the same sex and was about to leave, but the other party became angry and started to pull Frank and even tried to kiss him forcibly. I was eating melon on the side and was so excited that I felt gloating over his misfortune. You deserve it, Frank. Frank got angry, punched the man in the stomach, and turned away. I was still not satisfied and suddenly thought about how to disgust him in the future. Frank was in the bathroom and I stood next to him, glancing down exaggeratedly and screaming. Wow! Frank lifted his school uniform pants in disgust and stood 8 feet away from me. Frank was in gym class, and I attacked him from behind, slapped his butt, and rubbed it when my hand left. Wow! Frank's clothes were dirty and he was changing, so I deliberately got closer to him. Wow, Frank is really white. Frank couldn't stand it anymore and told his head teacher that he wanted to change classes. The head teacher was reluctant to let go of such a good student, and teachers from other classes scrambled to hire him. Finally, the head teacher called my dad. I got scolded and hated Frank even more. 5. I found out that the group of girls called Frank husband on the confession wall at school. No vision. Really have no vision. Instead of pursuing a tall, rich, and handsome guy like me, she actually likes Frank. The next day, I met Frank again at the school gate. Just as my hand was about to touch his butt, he suddenly grabbed my wrist. I sneered, Foshan Shadowless hand, you are so accurate. He pushed me away and ignored me. I suddenly yelled, Husband! All eyes at the school gate were suddenly cast towards us. Frank stiffened for a moment and quickly quickened his pace. Haha, Frank is scared, and I am happier. I immediately chased after him, shouting even louder. Husband, Frank, why are you running so fast? Wait for me. In less than a day, I became famous in the school for calling Frank husband at the school gate. My new little brother is very worried about this. Patrick, no matter how much you hate Frank, you shouldn't hurt your enemy and yourself. What if someone thinks you're gay? I think this is pure groundless worry. If I call you husband, I am a homosexual. Then if you call me ancestor, does that mean I am the Qin Shi Huang? But I forgot that rabbits will bite when they are cornered. What's more, Frank is a person with a weird personality. That day, the school arranged sports activities for the senior high school students so that everyone could relax. Now Frank could no longer hide in the classroom to read, so he had to come along and chose to play basketball, becoming my opponent. On the court, I deliberately led people to intercept his ball and acted arrogantly and provocatively. Honey, why don't you take the ball? Can't you get it? As soon as I said this, everyone on the court burst into laughter. Frank lost several games in a row. I smiled evilly and deliberately targeted him. Husband? What's wrong with you? Husband? Why aren't you talking, husband? Are you born a quiet person? Frank's face turned black. Later, Frank finally scored a goal despite being blocked from all sides. I exclaimed exaggeratedly, "Wow, my husband is so handsome. My husband is so great." Frank looked at me deeply and turned away. I made him really mad today, and I was so happy that I hummed a little tune and went to the locker room of the gymnasium to change clothes. As soon as I pushed open the door of the locker room, a huge force slammed me against the wall. 6. The next moment, Frank's face appeared before my eyes. "You! Why are you here?" As soon as I opened my mouth, Frank kissed me. His movements were fierce and swift, biting my lips and tongue fiercely. It was the first time that I realized how strong Frank was. I struggled for a long time but couldn't get free. Instead, he clamped my hand and kissed me so hard that I couldn't move. His kiss was devoid of emotion and skill, and it hurt my lips. After a long time, his lips slightly pulled away, but his hands did not loosen their grip. We were both exhausted and out of breath. I glared at him with the most ferocious expression. "Frank, are you sick? Let me go." He exhaled, expressionless. "Why don't you call me husband anymore?" I frowned. "Are you sick? Isn't it called husband? What's wrong with a husband kissing his wife?" Now it was my turn to get angry. "Wife is bullshit. I'm a man." He laughed without any emotion. "So what if he's a man? Didn't you just praise your husband for being so great?" After saying that, he kissed her again unexpectedly. This time the force was greater, but he was a top student and seemed to have found the technique. Not only did he attack me on the lips, his hands also lingered on my waist. My legs even began to feel weak. Gradually, I began to panic. Isn't he homophobic? Why is he kissing and touching her? Frank raised his head and loosened his grip. "Now tell me more about how great your husband is? Bravo to your dad." Neuropathy. I immediately pushed him away and ran out without even changing my clothes. Behind me, Frank's cold voice came. "Patrick, from now on, every time you call me husband, I will kiss you once. Just do what you say. If you don't believe me, try it." 7. People at school noticed that I now take a detour when I see Frank. It was like seeing the king of hell. The younger brother was very confused by this. "Patrick, why are you afraid of him? Just get him." I feel like my little brother and I are out of sync. He asked me to stop when I was being arrogant, and then asked me to deal with him after I stopped. So I beat up my little brother. My younger brother was on the same wavelength as me and also took a detour when he saw Frank. Frank suddenly became a figure that all the school bullies were afraid of. Someone said on the school's confession wall that we looked like we had broken up. I got furious. "What do you mean by broken up? We had never been together." Some people also said that the couple they were supporting seemed to be a flop. TSK. It was obvious that they didn't have enough homework and dared to support anything. Frank's life, however, remained stable. He always ranked first in the exams, always had his head down reading and doing exercises, was always dressed in a well-worn school uniform, and had a broken bicycle that even thieves would shake their heads at the sight of. My life seemed to have returned to the way it was before Frank transferred to our school. Time passed quickly and it was winter vacation. Family dinner on New Year's Eve. My father and stepmother were standing in the middle of the hall, speaking false and polite words, and other relatives and brothers were also smiling falsely, creating a harmonious atmosphere. I was staring at the plate on the table in boredom when suddenly I was bumped into and the wine spilled all over me. The waiter hurriedly apologized and squatted down to pick up the broken wine glass. Looking at the wet clothes, I said impatiently, "Stop picking them up. Call the cleaning staff." When I saw the waiter's face clearly, I was stunned and couldn't say anything. Frank, who was wearing a waiter uniform, paused for a moment and continued to pack his things with his head down. The hotel manager appeared upon hearing the noise, scolded Frank, then turned to me and smiled apologetically. I waved my hand and pointed at Frank and said, "Tell him to take me to change clothes." As soon as he entered the room arranged by the hotel, Frank pursed his lips and spoke. "How much does it cost to dry clean your clothes? I'll give you that." The dinner was really boring, and looking at the person in front of me, I suddenly felt like teasing him. "It's not much, maybe a few $1,000s. But if you serve me well, I'll waive the money." Unexpectedly, the usually calm and composed Lin Daxweba's face turned red at this moment. He didn't move and I was getting a little impatient waiting. When I was about to start to insult him, he slowly raised his hand. I closed my eyes with pleasure, ready to enjoy the service of my mortal enemy, when I heard a rustling sound in my ears and felt something was wrong. When I opened my eyes, Frank had already taken off his shirt. I jumped up from the sofa in shock. "Fuck! Frank, why are you taking off your clothes?" Frank endured the humiliation and shame. "Didn't Patrick want me to serve you? Isn't this the kind of service you gay men want?" "What the hell? We gay?" I got mad and yelled, "Who the fuck is gay? You are the gay. What the hell are you thinking about? I want you to give me a foot massage. You are a waiter here. Don't you know that one of the main features of this hotel is foot massage?" Frank's expression was blank for a moment. His face turned red and then white and red. After a long while, he opened his mouth in frustration and embarrassment. "I'm a winter vacation worker, and I'm only in charge of the banquet hall. I don't know." I closed my eyes, completely lost my mind, and waved my hand. "Forget it. You can get out. Your clothes. Just worry about yourself. I have plenty of clothes, and I don't mind if you dirty one." 9. The party was over and I didn't want to go back to see my father, stepmother, and my little brother who was only a few months old having a happy reunion. Still staying in the hotel. Because he offended me and my family was the hotel's largest customer. Frank was severely scolded by the manager and fired. I hid in the corner and watched him being scolded, with a blank expression on my face. As the New Year's bell rang, I lit a cigarette and Frank was sitting on the flower bed behind the hotel, seemingly on the phone. "Grandma, Happy New Year. Where's my sister?" "She's already asleep." "I'm doing fine here. The school is great, and the classmates are great. Today is New Year's Eve, and the school has prepared a big dinner for the students who stay on campus." "Why would I lie to you? It's really a feast, and we're eating in a 5-star hotel. I'm full now, and I'm digesting the food outside." "Yeah, I understand. I'm fine. Grandma, I'm gonna set off fireworks here, so I won't talk about it for now. Happy New Year, Grandma." I felt inexplicably irritated when I heard this. I crushed the cigarette but walked over slowly and sat next to him. I didn't expect that the college bully would also lie sometimes. Frank turned his head, saw it was me, then turned his head back, returning to his usual indifferent expression and ignoring me. I clicked my tongue and said, "What's wrong with you? I'm your client after all, so say something." He glanced at me and said, "I've been fired. My clothes cost 30,000 yuan. Even if I'm not your client, I'm still your creditor." He glared at me, his chest heaving with anger. I know he must think I'm a scoundrel now. I really laughed like a scoundrel. "Just chat with me for a while, and then we'll call it a day." He squeezed out words from between his teeth. "What are you talking about? Let's talk about why a top college student wants to work during the winter vacation. We are short of money." "Then what? No more." He really can't chat at all and doesn't want to chat with me. "Go on, if you speak well, you don't have to pay for the clothes." Frank gritted his teeth and said, "Then I'll explain the problem to you." I was so angry that I almost laughed. Just as I was about to choke him, a loud gurgling sound came from Frank's stomach. He immediately covered his stomach and turned his head away. His ears turned red. I realized that he probably hadn't eaten since noon. I patted his butt and pulled him up. "Let's go." "What are you going to do?" He didn't move. "Let's get a room." Frank pushed me away and said, "Didn't you say you're not gay?" I laughed in anger. "Go to the hotel and explain the problem to me. Okay? I don't want to be outside in the cold on the first night of the new year listening to you explain it to me." He pursed his lips and followed me reluctantly. 10. Looking at the sumptuous meal sent by the hotel, Frank's brows were twisted into a knot. "Patrick, are you feeling sorry for me?" I sneered and threw a pair of chopsticks at him. "Brother, you look so sympathetic. I didn't eat much tonight. I just asked you to eat with me." He picked up the chopsticks and lowered his eyes. "Then I'll give you money." "Okay, the meal is provided by the hotel. This suite is $8,000 a night. I'll give you a discount. You can give me $2,000. Frank paused and put down his chopsticks again. I was speechless. "I give up, brother. You can eat. It's free. I'll treat you." No. I'll pay you to eat with me. I can't eat alone, is that okay?" This guy is really twisted. Seeing me move my chopsticks, he slowly followed suit, being very reserved. It turns out that the academic genius who was cold, aloof, and kept to himself at school was actually like this in private. "Today is New Year's Day. Why aren't you with your parents?" he suddenly asked. "It's boring. I don't want to see him having fun with his stepmother and that little brat." The air fell silent again. "What about you? You don't go home during the New Year and you work here during the winter vacation. Don't your parents miss you? I heard you call me. You still have a grandmother and a sister." I asked back. "Dead." My hands stopped moving. I felt annoyed and wanted to slap myself, wondering why I was so talkative. Frank, on the other hand, was very calm. He lowered his eyes and ate slowly. After a while, he finished the rice in his bowl and looked up at me. "Patrick, tell me when you're done eating and I'll explain the problem to you." I was almost choked by his words. He really intended to explain the problem to me. "Please spare me. I don't want to listen to the class. Please talk about something else." He thought about it and began to tell me stories, historical stories. I didn't expect that he, a science expert, knows so much about history, and his lectures are quite interesting. The corners of his lips curved slightly. "My mother is a history teacher. Frank has a very nice voice, and he told the story in a very pleasant way. Before I knew it, I fell asleep on the sofa. When I woke up, I had been moved to the bed, covered with a quilt, and my things were neatly placed on the table. It was bright outside the window and Frank was gone. 11. Find Frank's address from the class directory. Frank was stunned when he saw me appear. "What are you doing here?" I glanced around his tiny room, which was not even as big as my bathroom. I dragged him out and stuffed him into a taxi. "You provided great service last night, so I'm here to give you a tip." The taxi driver couldn't help but look at us in the rearview mirror when he heard this. Frank's face turned black. "Patrick!" I was very happy to see him angry, so I held him down to prevent him from getting off the car and told the driver my address. Frank's eyes widened when he heard the address. "What are you doing there?" I smiled and said, "It's a tip." Frank's face darkened and he said he would not go no matter what. It was not until I threatened him with clothes worth 30,000 yuan that he went reluctantly. The taxi drove for more than 6 hours and arrived at the destination. That's right, it's Frank's grandmother's house and also his home, in a remote mountain village. Although I always go against Frank, I don't really hate him or say that he is a heinous criminal. But when I heard his phone call with his grandmother last night, I suddenly missed my grandmother too. It's a pity that I can't see her anymore. Since I can't see mine, I might as well act as Aladdin's lamp and let Frank see it. "Patrick, you are pitying me," he said in an affirmative tone. "Frank doesn't want to owe me a favor." I didn't comment. "I'm tired of always picking on you at school. Let's be kind this time and be friendly classmates from now on. How about that?" He looked at me solemnly and was about to say something, but I had already gone up to the door with the gifts I had bought and knocked on the door. "Frank, this is the one, right?" Grandma Frank, Happy New Year. Come out and see who's back. I shouted loudly through the door, and I heard footsteps behind it. When the white-haired old man saw Frank, a smile suddenly appeared on his confused face, and tears flashed in his eyes. Her tone was filled with a hint of joy. "Tuwa, didn't you say you wouldn't come back?" "Oh, come on, you lied to me." I couldn't help laughing. If those girls in school knew that the perfect Frank in their eyes was nicknamed Tuwa, their filters would be shattered. Frank blushed in embarrassment. "Grandma, Grandma, Frank didn't lie to you. The school gave good students free tickets to go home, but the tickets are only valid today. He gave you a surprise." I smiled and hugged Frank, acting like we were good brothers, and explained to Grandma. Grandma looked at me and was very happy. "It's Tua's classmate. Come in and sit down, Tua. Go and get some water for your classmate." I looked at Frank smugly. Frank didn't argue with me for once and went to the stove to pour water obediently. My grandmother has poor legs and feet, but she looks in good spirits and is particularly warm to me. He kept praising me for being handsome and good-looking, and thanked me for helping Frank. He praised me to the skies. For a moment, I blushed with shame. After all, he transferred to our school and I had always been causing trouble for him. Frank followed his grandmother's advice and thanked me. "Thank you, Patrick." His eyes were serious and solemn, and my heart suddenly beat faster for a few seconds. Oh, this pair of grandparents and grandchildren is really embarrassing. 12. Listening to Frank's grandmother chatting with me, I learned that Frank's parents both died while rescuing people during the heavy rain in the village last year, leaving behind 2 young children and 1 old man. The village committee was moved by his parents' heroic deeds and gave his family a subsidy. They also transferred him to a provincial school and rented him a low-rent house. But the subsidy was less than 1,000 yuan a month, which was impossible to support 3 people, so Frank would work illegally after school. To get from school to my grandma's house, I have to first take a 2-hour green train, then take a bus, and finally take a motorcycle and then walk a short dirt road. Therefore, in order to save money, Frank chose not to come back for the new year. Having grown up in a wealthy family, this was the first time I had such a concrete understanding of poverty and resilience. I began to regret what I had done to Frank. Frank said calmly while making the bed, "You don't have to feel sorry for me. We are not from the same world. You are not obligated to be sympathetic and friendly to everyone. I am a bit emo. When comparing myself to others, I felt resentful when my mother passed away and my father remarried quickly. But compared with Frank, it was just like whining." Frank looked up at me, as if he could read my mind. "Patrick, pain cannot be compared. No one's pain is bluffing, and no one's pain is more worthy of praise. Don't think too much. Just come and sleep. There are only 3 rooms in Grandma's house, 1 for Grandma and 1 for my sister Frank, so I had to sleep in one with Frank. His bed was very small and hard. The 2 boys lay flat on their backs with their arms pressed tightly together. I had never slept in the same bed with anyone since I was a child, so I felt a little uncomfortable and tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. Frank suddenly sat up and said, "I'll go sleep on the floor." I quickly stopped him. When living in someone else's house, how can you let them sleep on the floor, especially in the middle of winter? I had to pretend to be disgusted and make an excuse. "It's a bit cold. I can't sleep." Frank was silent for a moment, then lay down and held me in his arms. "Are you still cold?" My whole body tensed up and my ears turned red. "Frank, you don't have to do this. That's why you're not cold." He hugged me tighter, closed his eyes and whispered, "Don't move, go to sleep." His tone was so calm that it couldn't be refused. I felt intimidated for some reason and just lay there motionless. I thought I would be sleepless the whole night, but when I heard the gentle breathing sound behind me, I slowly felt sleepy. 13. When I woke up, Frank was no longer in the bed. The aroma of food wafts in with the sunshine. From outside the house came Grandma's deliberately suppressed scolding. "Country boy, be quiet. Patrick is still sleeping." Frank said helplessly, "It's already past 8 o'clock. I've already heated up breakfast twice. It's time to get up. It's not easy for Patrick to come here. If you know better, what's wrong with getting hot a few times? Yes, yes, I'll listen to Grandma. It's getting hot. I'll go see Angela. After hearing the conversation, I, who usually get up at 11 or 12 o'clock, blushed and hurriedly put on my clothes and went out. Just then, I ran into Frank coming out of the kitchen. He smiled at me and said, "You're awake. Breakfast is ready. I'll go get Angela." I nodded embarrassedly. The weather was good today, so Frank and Grandma moved the table to the yard to eat. During the meal, my sister Angela would sneak a glance at me from time to time. Then she whispered to Frank in what she thought was a low voice, "Brother, this brother is so beautiful." I buried my head in my food, pretending not to hear, but inside I couldn't help but feel happy, and my ears turned red. Although Frank is not likable, his sister is really nice and has good taste. After hearing what my sister said, Frank looked up at me, and after a while, he uttered a low "hmm." My heart trembled for no reason. After dinner, Grandma asked Frank to take me for a walk around the neighborhood. I had never been to a mountain village before, so I felt very new and jumped around in the woods. Frank rarely complained and followed me obediently. When we got back, Grandma asked us why we didn't bring Angela back. Frank frowned. "Angela didn't go out with us." Grandma was anxious. "What? She said she would go out to look for you guys and come back for dinner. And she's been out for an hour or two, and you didn't run into her?" Frank's expression suddenly became serious and he turned and ran out. "Patrick, stay in the house with Grandma. I'm going to find Angela." I was not happy about it. It was almost dark and the mountain was so huge. It would take him a long time to find the way by himself. So I went to help too. However, when they chased after him, Frank had disappeared. Following my memory of the mountain road during the day, I called Angela's name as I walked. It was completely dark and I still hadn't found Angela. To make matters worse, my phone was dead and I had no idea where to go. I was also a little panicked, and clips from some horror movies flashed through my mind involuntarily. Suddenly, intermittent crying sounds were heard from the bushes. My hair stood on end. "Who is it? Angela?" The crying stopped for a moment, then became louder. "Brother! It's not a ghost, it's Angela." I breathed a sigh of relief and hurried towards the source of the sound. The little girl huddled in a pile of dead branches and grass, with scratches on her body, crying loudly. I carried Angela on my back and started looking for a way in the mountains. Angela was tired from crying and fell asleep on her back. I don't know how long I walked or where I went, but I felt like I was going numb, until a beam of light swept across me. I quickly waved and shouted, "There's someone here! Help!" The light source swept back and quickly approached me. "It's Frank." He rushed over with red eyes and hugged me. "Patrick, what are you running around for? I thought you and Angela." When I saw Frank, my tense and tired nerves relaxed. I felt so wronged by his yelling that I started crying. "Damn it. I thought I was going to be buried here tonight. I carried Angela for a long time before you came over, and you yelled at me." Frank was startled by my crying, and with a panicked look on his face, he moved Angela from my back to his arms. He frantically tried to coax me. "No, Patrick. Don't cry. I didn't mean to be mean to you, I was just worried. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have yelled at you." I sobbed and glared at him. "I didn't cry. I'm a big man and I don't bear grudges, I'm just cold." He coaxed me in a good-tempered voice and held my hand. "Okay. I was wrong. Let's go back and I'll warm the bed for you." The cold moonlight shone on the winding mountain road. Frank held Angela in one hand and held my hand in the other as we walked back. The night wind was bitingly cold, but our clasped palms were warm enough to produce sweat. 14. We only found out when Angela woke up the next day and recalled it in bits and pieces. Angela did go to find us. She had walked that route many times with her grandmother, and she met several other boys from the village on the way. These people knew that Angela was a little mentally retarded because her brain was burned by an illness when she was 2 years old, but they deliberately said they wanted to play hide and seek with Angela, letting Angela hide alone in a remote mountain. Then they ignored looking for her and went home. Grandma was so angry that she was wiping away tears, and Frank had a gloomy face and no one knew what he was thinking. I jumped up and rushed to the house of the culprit, cursing. The mother of the little boy who took the lead in bullying Angela started cursing. She's just a silly girl. So what if she's lost? Why are you so mean to my son? She's really not raised by her parents, so she has no manners at all. Your son has such vicious parents. It seems that his parents would be better off dead. I was about to take off my shoes and throw them at him, but Frank stopped me. Behind him followed the village chief and members of the village committee. Frank lowered his eyes and spoke pitifully. Uncle Village Chief, after my parents passed away, it became inconvenient for me, my grandmother, my sister, and I to stay in the village. I thought, why don't we leave the village? The village chief was shocked and quickly stopped them. He scolded the boy's family and asked them to bring eggs, vegetables, and fruits to apologize. Because of the righteous act of Frank's parents, the county gave the village funding and special treatment. If Frank and his friends left, the benefits would disappear. But Frank wanted more than an apology. I didn't expect that we would have such a similar idea. At 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, Frank and I met at the door of the little boy's house at the same time. Looking at each other's eyes, we instantly knew what to do. The door of the mud house in the village was not locked tightly, so we quietly carried the little boy out and threw him into a nearby field. The next day, the little boy's mother was heard screaming like a pig being slaughtered. Who the hell threw my son on the ground? 2 days later, we stopped stealing her son and secretly trampled the vegetables in her field, which made her howl again. But she couldn't find any evidence that it was us, so she could only suffer in silence. 15. The senior high school students will start school on the 10th day of the first lunar month, so Frank has to go back early. The night before I left, I suddenly had the idea of going to the opposite hill to watch the sunrise. Frank reluctantly released his arms around me and climbed up from the bed. The mountain road was slippery at night and I almost fell several times. Frank didn't show any impatience. He silently held my hand and protected me in front. When we reached the top of the mountain, the sun had not yet risen. My original excitement had disappeared long ago during the climb, and now I was extremely sleepy, so Frank let me sleep on his shoulder. I don't know how long it was before I was gently woken up. Patrick, wake up, the sun is coming out. I opened my eyes and saw the glow in the sky slowly spreading outwards. When the cold sun climbed out of the clouds, I excitedly turned my head and patted Frank. Frank, sunrise. Frank also smiled and turned his head. I was caught off guard and I bumped into his smiling eyes. Our noses touched and our breaths intertwined. Everything in the world seemed to stop at this moment. Thump, thump, thump. The heart beats uncontrollably. I took a step back in panic, and Frank turned his head away, both of our faces red. I don't know if it was caused by the cold wind. 16. When I left, Grandma couldn't stop crying, but she always said that it was the strong wind that blew her eyes. Angela hid behind her grandmother and whispered goodbye to me. Since Frank and I didn't have our ID cards with us, we took a taxi back home and paid the driver for the idle mileage as we did last time. He was sleeping in the car and I was playing with my phone. When I reached into my bag for the charging cable, I discovered an extra stack of money in the inconspicuous lining. All added up, it amounted to 2,000 yuan. There was a note inside, written by Grandma. Although I didn't receive much education, I know that there is no school that is good enough to pay for transportation. Thank you, Patrick. The nasal cavity suddenly felt sore and unbearable. Tears welled up in my eyes. I sniffled and woke Frank up. He looked confused. What's wrong? What happened? I shook my head and remained silent. I couldn't let him see that I was moved. Frank pursed his lips and said hesitantly, "Are you cold? Do you want me to hold you to sleep?" My face flushed. No. 17. After the winter vacation, some changes are quietly happening. Back then in the taxi, I gave the 2,000 yuan back to Frank, but Frank didn't want it. I said arrogantly, "What are you thinking? I am not a philanthropist. If you accept the money, you will be my younger brother in school. Do you understand?" Frank remained silent and didn't say whether he agreed or not. At school, he still keeps to himself and rarely talks to others. However, he would secretly put notes in my desk pocket, correct the spelling mistakes on my papers and give them to me, and even made a 100-day sprint plan for me. I looked incredulous and asked him what was wrong with him. He said calmly, "Become your little brother. How can you be a younger brother like this? I think you want to bully me and be my big brother." I pushed the test paper on the table away with an angry tone. "I've seen your previous report cards. Your grades were actually not bad. It wasn't until your father remarried in your first year of high school that you—" He pulled out the chair next to me and sat down. "Patrick, don't risk your future by getting angry with someone who is not worthy." My face darkened, and for the first time I said to him with a gloomy expression, "Is it your business? Do you really take yourself seriously?" Frank was stunned, looking somewhat embarrassed. The new student happened to come in from outside the classroom, and when he saw the corrected test paper on my desk, he raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Patrick, you are going to study abroad. Why are you still here preparing for the college entrance examination?" Frank's eyelids twitched suddenly. He looked up and said softly, "You are going abroad?" Seeing him like this, I suddenly felt annoyed. I looked away. "Yeah." Frank was silent for a moment, then stood up and chuckled to himself. "Okay, I was just being sentimental." I subconsciously wanted to hold him back, but stopped when I raised my hand. "Never mind, I didn't ask him to do this for me. I am willing to let myself fall into depravity. Who wants him to meddle in my affairs?" Just looking at his back, I felt more and more depressed. Frank never spoke to me again, and we became strangers again. In the first and second mock exams of the city, Frank took the first place in the city. The future is promising, and it's unlikely that I can pass the undergraduate entrance line. When I got home, the nanny was cooking, my stepmother was holding my little brother, and my father was teasing him. What a picture of a happy family. Seeing me come in, the father paid me a glance and went back to teasing his little son. "I think you shouldn't go to school recently. You're going abroad anyway. Why don't you stay at home and spend more time with your mother and brother?" I paused and sneered. "That's your wife and son. It has nothing to do with me." The father looked up and said, "Patrick, apologize to your mother and brother." "Apologize?" I rolled my eyes and looked at my stepmother. "Michelle, you took advantage of my mom's illness, climbed into my dad's bed, and pissed her off to death. Do you deserve an apology from me? My mom is really unlucky to have a slutty best friend like you." Pa! A copy of Das Kapital flew over and hit me on the head, and the hardcover of the hardcover book broke my forehead. The father's face was dark. "Pick up the book and put it back in the study. I will call your teacher. Don't go to school." After I was beaten, my stepmother gently advised me, "Husband, Patrick is still young. How can you take his words seriously? Look, what if you beat the child and hurt him?" I smiled and said, "It's okay if he doesn't go to school, but you have to be careful. I might kill your little son one day." Pa! Another book was thrown at me. I dodged to the side, and the book smashed the vase behind me. I sneered and went upstairs to my room. The next day, the driver said I didn't need to go to school, so there was no car allocated for me. My father seemed to be really afraid that I would hurt the mother and son, so he bought them plane tickets and sent them on vacation. I started to have nothing to do and just hung out with other second-generation rich kids. 2 days before the college entrance examination, I went to the toilet in the bar after drinking too much. I heard someone talking in the corner of the corridor. He caused me to drop out of school. I want him to not be able to take the college entrance examination. I glanced sideways, and the person who was speaking seemed to be my former younger brother. The man didn't see me and walked away arm in arm with another man. I didn't take it seriously. Just one night before the college entrance examination, I suddenly received a call on my cell phone from an unfamiliar number. After the call was connected, there was silence except for the sound of breathing from the other end. After a few seconds, he was hung up. For some reason, I felt that the call was from Frank. In fact, I have always regretted that I shouldn't have lost my temper with him last time, but I couldn't bring myself to speak to him. The next day, for some unknown reason, I showed up near the low-rent housing where Frank lived early in the morning and followed him like a pervert. As time went by, I felt like I was really sick. I wasted my precious time not sleeping and came to peek at Frank early in the morning. Just as he was about to take a taxi home, he suddenly saw 3 or 4 people rushing out of the alley and grabbing Frank. I rushed over quickly. The people in the alley started beating him fiercely with iron bars. Frank was outnumbered and was pinned to the ground. I knocked down a few people with my fists and tried to help Frank up, but an iron rod suddenly hit my back, and we both fell down. I threw myself on top of Frank, and most of the blows from the fists and sticks fell on me. I pushed Frank out. "Run! You still have the college entrance exam to take." Frank gritted his teeth and said with red eyes, "This is my business, go away." I was furious and yelled, "Go call the police and then take the college entrance exam. My last name is He. They dare not do anything to me. Go quickly. Otherwise I will hate you forever." Frank gritted his teeth, looked at me deeply, and ran out of the alley. When I was beaten and bleeding, sirens sounded at the alley entrance and Frank and the police appeared. The attacker was taken away and I was put in an ambulance. Frank tried to catch up, but I weakly glared at him angrily. "Hurry up and take the college entrance examination, or I'll beat you up." In the end, with red eyes, he was escorted by the police to the examination room on time. 20. The matter was soon clarified. It turned out that the younger brother was dissatisfied with being expelled from school and attributed all his resentment to Frank's report. He found a few gangsters to beat Frank up so that he couldn't take the exam. But now I am the one who is hurt more seriously. Although my relationship with my father is not good, I am also his son. Therefore, these people were arranged to be severely punished. Frank successfully completed the college entrance examination and came to see me in the ward. "I'm sorry." He looked downcast, his nails digging into his palms. I grinned and said arrogantly, "Sorry for me? Go peel an apple for me." Frank was very obedient. He not only peeled the apple, but also cut it into small pieces to make it easier to feed me. Seeing me licking my lips, he very considerately fed me water. I was so embarrassed by the service. "Okay, the college entrance exam is over. Aren't you going to go back and see Grandma and Angela?" While cleaning up the leftovers from my snacks, he said, "Take a summer job and earn some money." I nodded and the room fell into silence. Frank didn't seem to feel embarrassed and was even more diligent than my caregiver. He brought me tea and water, fed me, and packed my clothes. A week passed like this and I was discharged from the hospital just in time for my graduation party. During this period, a classmate asked me when I would go abroad. I subconsciously glanced at Frank and said early July. Frank had a blank expression on his face. He just replaced the wine glass in front of me with juice and clenched his fingers silently. After asking me questions, everyone asked about Frank's estimated score, etc. Frank gave a perfunctory answer and the party went fairly harmoniously. As the party went on, everyone had more and more fun, and some people even drank too much and confessed their love in public, which immediately livened up the atmosphere. I joined in the fun and wanted to secretly take a sip of wine. The next second, the cup was taken away, and Frank's eyes were gloomy. "The doctor said that your injury has not healed, so you can't drink." I pouted, "College bully, you really spoil the fun." He remained indifferent, took away all the wine in front of me, and straightened my folded collar. "Patrick, I really hate your temper. Arrogant and spoiled, evil-minded but not completely evil. You clearly know your current situation, but you always indulge yourself. Just do it. In the end, only I will like you, and you can only be with me. But Patrick, you just have to obey me now, and I'll drink with you later." He spoke very calmly, moving the bottle with a focused gaze. The music in the private room was blasting. Everyone was cheering and shouting, concentrating on their own things. No one noticed what the school's proudest student was saying in this corner. But I heard it clearly. I heard his confession mixed in with his chatter. My face turned red even before I drank. A boy riding a bicycle on a rainy day, a stubborn and embarrassed face on New Year's Eve, the anxious look under the moonlight, and that mountain top. His smiling eyes in the morning glow. I took a deep breath and reached for the bottle he had moved away. Frank frowned and raised his hand to press on the back of my hand. "Patrick," I said. Before he could finish his words, the boy's eyes widened slightly and his whole body froze as if he had been electrocuted. He saw me turn my wrist, and when his long fingers touched mine, they slipped into his fingers and interlocked with his. I sighed and looked at him straight in the face. "But I just want a drink, husband." 21. It was still in the same hotel suite we booked last time, and he kissed me so hard that my lips were swollen like sausages. But he kissed me again and again without stopping. I pushed his face hard. "I only screamed once. You kissed me for too long." He hugged me and buried his head in my neck. "It can't be helped. Your husband lasts longer." What kind of lewd words are these? 22. We started off on an extremely difficult road. Love between two boys and cross-border love. We keep in touch every day both at home and abroad, and I will go back to China to see him during the winter and summer vacations. He is still shining with excellence and started working on projects with his seniors right after entering university, growing at a terrifying speed. Under Frank's influence, I also studied hard abroad and made extensive connections. As Frank said, what the mother and son feared most was having the financial power of the He family in their own hands. During the 4 years of college, we worked hard to thrive in our respective countries, and also absorbed love wholeheartedly when we met. Love is important and future is also important, but the right lover stands in the future. For years later, I returned to China. Frank was waiting for me in the airport lounge, wearing a nice suit and holding a rose in his hand. Many people coming and going looked at him sideways. His eyes were fixed on me, smiling.